Hello everyone, this is part 5 of this oil cooler replacement project. I hope you're enjoying what you've watched so far, and I hope you enjoy this part. Okay, so now let's lower the vehicle. I don't want to install the Crossmember yet, because if I install the Crossmember, I'm not going to have this splay to install the brackets and the EGR cooler assembly. So now let's lower the vehicle so we can install the EGR tube and the EGR cooler assembly and the catalytic converter bracket. We are back under the hood. Now we're gonna install our catalytic converter bracket. So this bracket is gonna go in this way. So our catalytic converter is still loose. So just like that. Now it helps to put the bottom catalytic converter bolt on the turbo, because that helps hook the catalytic converter in place. So as you can see, everything is lined up. So now I'm gonna get the bolt for this bracket and put them on. Now, while this bracket is loose, I'm going to install the bolt and the nut that holds this bracket on the catalytic converter tube. So that's good. Everything is lined up back there. So now we're gonna install these two bolts, our brand new bolts for the catalytic converter over here. I'm just gonna get them started. I won't tighten them yet. I just want to get them started behind the turbo here. Alright, so I got the bolt for the catalytic converter tube on the back of the turbo started, so we're good to go. So now I'm going to tighten this bolt. That's good. So now we're going to tighten the bolts of the back of the turbo tube. All right, so everything is tightened back there. So now we're gonna install our EGR tube. We're gonna get our EGR tube ready. Now, I'm gonna show you a trick that I like to use to keep the EGR tube gaskets in place. Now, these gaskets have to go over here. So we got brand new gaskets here. This one goes over here. And then this one goes right here. Right here. Okay, now, if you just try to install this tube and then feed these gaskets afterwards, it can be very difficult. What I like to do is I like to use a wire strand. So I will get a long wire, long electrical wire, and then strip it out, and then I will use the strands of the wire to keep the gaskets on the tube so they don't fall. Okay, so I know this one goes this way. Okay, so this is gonna go this way. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use this wire strand and put them over here to prevent this gasket from falling. Okay, now these wire strands are very tiny. When we start the engine with the exhaust heat, they're gonna get burnt. So you don't have to worry about leaving these wire strands over here. I just want them to hold my gasket in place, just like that. Okay, so if I do this, as you can see, the gasket does not fall. Okay, so I'm gonna do the same thing on this side. So this is gonna go this way. So this is my trick that I like to use to keep these gaskets in place. And it works very well, guys. So I recommend you use this trick. Because especially when you get the EGR cooler assembly in, getting this gasket can be very painful. Okay, so we got our gaskets on. We got this one here, and then this one. So now our EGR tube is ready to be installed. So now let's take it to the vehicle so we can install it. So here comes our EGR tube. We're gonna feed it through here. Now I always like to get the top bolt of the EGR tube started. So I'm gonna get the bolt for the EGR tube up there. So here are the bolts for the EGR tube. We're gonna install brand new bolts there. So installing this tube back here is very interesting. So we have to carefully make sure that the bolt is gonna get aligned here. So I'm basically just filling everything. I got the first one started. So now I'm gonna install the second one. So at this point I'm making sure that everything is lined up, and then get the bolts started. So you have to finesse this. Okay, so I have both bolts started. Now I'm gonna use a mirror to look back there so I can make sure the gasket didn't move. The gasket shouldn't move because we have these wire strands holding the gasket in place, but I'm gonna use a mirror to double check and make sure everything is lined up. We're gonna use this mirror here. So I need to double check and make sure that the gasket didn't move. So everything looks good over here. Perfect. We are good to go. The gasket didn't move, everything is in place. Very good. Now I'm not gonna tighten these bolts yet. I'm just gonna get them snug. We have to keep them loose because we need the tube. We want the tube to move. The tube has to be loose a little bit when we install the EGR cooler assembly. All right. So that's good. Everything looks good. So we're good to go here. So now let's install our EGR cooler assembly. So here is the EGR assembly. We're gonna get a couple bolts on. So this side bolt has to get on already while it's out. So now our EGR assembly, our EGR cooler assembly rather, can now be installed. Once again, you have to finesse this. So we gotta make sure that everything is out of the way. All right, so just like that, the EGR assembly is installed. So now I'm gonna install the long bolts that go back here. All right, so we're good. So now we're gonna install the gasket that goes on the front tube of the EGR valve. We have to install that gasket when the EGR assembly is still loose. Now we're gonna install the gasket for the front tube of the EGR valve. So we still have a gap over here between the tube and the EGR valve body. Okay, so everything is lined up. Now we're going to install the second one. Alright, so I got the bolts started. The gasket is there, so we're good to go. Very nice. Alright, very good. So now we can tighten the rest of the EGR cooler assembly bolts. Okay, so we got the bolts started. I'm gonna keep them loose a little bit so we can have some wiggle room, some play on the EGR cooler assembly. Okay, so we got these front bolts started, the gasket is installed, we're good to go. So now let's install the rest of the EGR cooler bolts. So now we're gonna install all the bolts for the EGR cooler assembly. And then we're going to tighten them. There's a bracket below the EGR housing here. All right, so at this point I'm making sure that all the bolts are tightened, all the gaskets are in place. So right now we are cruising. We are doing the reverse process of the removal process. Alright, so we got all the bolts for the EGR cooler assembly tightened. So now let's install the EGR tube bracket bolt. Alright, I got the EGR bracket bolt started. So now let's go under the vehicle and finish everything underneath. Let's get the bottom EGR tube bolt started and tightened. We're gonna install the cross member. Let's finish everything underneath, and then we're gonna come back up here under the hood to connect all the electrical connectors and then start the engine. And while we're under the hood, we're also gonna do an oil change. So now let's go under the vehicle. We are back here under the vehicle. Now I'm gonna tighten this exhaust clamp. I'm gonna get it tight, and then we're gonna install our cross member. I'm getting this clamp lined up. All right, so the exhaust clamp is tightened. Now I'm gonna reconnect our exhaust temperature sensor. All right, so I got the exhaust temperature sensor reconnected. So everything looks good over here. So now I'm gonna install the EGR tube bolt. I'm gonna bring you here so I can show you the bolt that I'm about to install. Here is what we have below the EGR cooler assembly. Now I'm gonna install the bolt for the EGR tube. So the gasket is in place. Now I'm gonna tighten these bolts. I'm gonna install these bolts. I can't do this while I'm holding the camera. I'm gonna get these on, and then I'll bring you guys back up. All right, so the EGR tube bolts are tightened, so we're good to go. So now let's install the cross member. I'm gonna install our jack first to jack the transmission up. Now we're gonna install this bracket first for the exhaust catalytic converter. It's coming back together. We're gonna be done very soon. So now our cross member can be installed. Here comes our cross member. We're gonna lower the transmission. Now we're going to tighten the bolts for the cross member. We got the first 4 bolts tightened, so now I'm going to remove our jack. And then we're going to tighten these ones. All right, so we are almost done down here. I'm gonna get our jack out of the way. So now I'm gonna bring you up front here so we can drain the engine oil.